Okay, let's start the meeting. I'll call the meeting to order. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, GL Chapter 38, Section 18, and the Governor's June 16, 2021 revised order, this meeting of the Berkshire Hills Regional School District School Committee will be conducted both in person and remote. In-person attendance will be limited to Berkshire Hills Regional School District School Committee members, superintendent, and district school administrators. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted at this time. However, the meeting may be accessed remotely through Zoom and or Facebook. Agenda items listed as reasonably anticipated by the chair. Not all items listed may in fact be discussed. Those items not listed may be brought up for discussion to the extent permitted by law. This meeting is being recorded by CTSB and the school committee recorder and will be broadcast. Once transcribed and approved, minutes will be made public and posted to our website. Let's first do a roll call to see who's here. Ann Hutchinson. Aye. Jason St. Peter. Aye. John Stevens. Bonnie Bond.
Aye.
Molly Thomas.
Aye.
Bill Fields. Here. Diane Singer.
Here.
Corey Spray.
Here. Here.
Richard. Here. And that's a full attendance. Great. We have in our packet the minutes of September 9th, 2021. Do I have a motion? Motion approved. Do I have a second?
Second.
So a motion by Rich, a second by Molly. Any discussion? Roll call vote. Ann? Aye. Jason? Aye. Sean? Sean, are you still with us? Bonnie?
Aye.
Molly?
Aye.
Bill? Yes. Diane?
Yes.
Corey?
Aye.
Rich? Yep. And I, it's 9-0 in favor. Superintendent's report.
Okay, I'll jump into some good news. This is this time of year where we're getting lots of grants, and we're going to do a really big report on all the grants and new funding that's coming in. But historically, we've gotten around $38,000 in rural sparsity aid, and the number came in yesterday, and it's a little more than $100,000. So we'll put that on the list of things we talk about, but it's nice to have 60 more than we expected, or 62 more. And 2 weeks from now, we'll give you like a whole report of all the grants. Some of them are, their intent is obligated and we have to do it in a certain way, and many of them are open-ended. And we're thinking of an interesting activity where before we share some of our thinking around it, we might do a public brainstorming session, and I'll send that info out to you in the packet, and then work through that. But we'll be talking about that in 2 weeks' time, and I'm psyched about the rural sparsity aid. It's unexpected and really nice.
One thing not to forget about that I was going to raise at Finance Committee is to discuss the past, because we should be now line iteming all things in the actual budget that are grant funded and highlighting as such, rather than just leaving them out of the budget altogether.
Okay, let's talk about that and talk about it with Sharon. There may be some technical reason why we might have to keep two sets.
Can we do it as an addendum to the book, like at the end?
Well, you put it in. You don't have to put an amount, and you put 0 grant funded, so people know it's being funded.
For the positions and
Yeah.
what we're spending.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, no, it's a good idea, and we'll talk to Sharon around the details of how to present it. So that's, I think, really all I wanted to share from a good news perspective. Katie and or Christy, do you want to share anything, or are you talking in other ways so it's unnecessary now?
I'm talking in other ways, so it's not necessary. No, I should probably be fine.
Okay, good. So we'll stop with that. In terms of good news, the student member items, do you folks have things?
We're gonna defer this until we've had time to address some ideas and concerns within the school building before we bring it here.
Great, well, thank you for that. So what I'd like to do now is move to Iona Smith. Iona is our Director of Wellness district-wide. And importantly, Iona's position is funded by the Great Barrington Marijuana Mediation Funds. And she's doing some really, really interesting things district-wide, and went on a giant listening tour. And it's time for her to give us some of her initial thoughts on that. This is really closely aligned with the health and wellness group. It's closely aligned with work we've articulated in the district and school improvement plans. And I feel we're like on the edge of doing something remarkable. So I think this is Iona's, like, she was introduced before, but this is her first time presenting to the school committee. So welcome, Iona.
Thank you. And I was going to share my screen, so let's see if I can get that happening.
Do you see it like on the bottom of the toolbar?
So I do, but I'm also seeing a exclamation point saying, I'm not able to go to my desktop. So I don't know if there's anyone else more savvy about this, but it does not seem to be.
Do you want to just email it to me and I'll click the slides for you?
Okay, is there something else you all can move to for a moment and I'm going to figure that out? Or should we wait while I'm doing that?
No, why don't you do that? I could talk a little bit about COVID-19,
Okay.
and then we'll come back to you, and it's sort of health related. Couple things connected to COVID-19. So I think the last time we met, the countywide case rate per 100,000 was up around 160. We'd like it to be around 50. It's come down to 118. So from 160 to 118 is great, right? We're making progress. We're deep into pool testing in the schools, and we've not had in any context any positive cases in the schools in the last 14 days. So that's huge. And at the moment, no students nor staff are quarantined, which is also huge. And I'm really excited about that. The number of students in Muddy Brook tested this week were 181, at Du Bois 194, and at Monument 265. Monument's results came back already this week, and again, there's no positives. And we're waiting for the results from Muddy Brook and Du Bois, and we'll likely get those tomorrow. Okay, so I'm pretty happy about where we are. I think people are working hard to follow directives around masking and other things, and that's good. What I would like to recommend and ask for your endorsement is a slight change in how we're approaching pool testing. Some people are now calling it routine weekly testing instead of pool testing. Every once in a while, I actually write something down because the language has to be so specific, and this is one of those cases. So all along, we've been encouraging all students to participate in weekly testing, and those participating in extracurricular activities are mandated to do so. After speaking with DESE, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed, the Department of Public Health, and local physicians, I'm proposing a slight shift. And this recommendation or decision that I'm proposing is imperfect, okay? Going forward, I would like vaccinated students participating in extracurricular activities to be waived from participating in routine weekly testing. That being said, there are two additional considerations. Any student who is symptomatic should be tested, rapid or pool. right? And symptoms could include almost anything under the sun. And if the situation with variants changes, i.e. we see growth in infection rates, Delta, Mu, or Lambda become more pervasive, I may come back to adjust the determination. But my thinking here is the possibility of vaccinated people getting infected is very low. That waiving them from the testing recognizes their commitment to get vaccinated, and that it makes more sense to focus our energy on the smaller number of people who are unvaccinated and in turn at greater risk. When I said this, that my decision was, or recommendation is imperfect, DESE and DPH are crystal clear that they do not recommend that vaccinated people be tested. Local physicians are a little split, and in maybe an ideal world, one would recommend that everybody get tested, maybe even more than once a week, but twice a week. I think in our context where things are moving in the right direction and going well, that exempting the vaccinated students makes sense. So, a lot for you to think about. I think I gave you enough context, and later in the meeting, we may talk, several other districts are moving towards mandates for vaccinating students. And this may be sort of all sorts of stuff tied to policies around carrots and sticks. And this may be a carrot that is attractive to that. My sense is our vaccination rate at the high school of students is a little bit above 75%. And our staff rate is 99% in the whole district. I'd like to close the student gap and get more people vaccinated.
Discussion.
Peter said districts are moving, there's several districts that have implemented vaccination mandates already.
Yeah, and I think we should discuss that on an agenda in a future meeting.
I think it should be on the agenda for the next meeting. I'd like it, I'm sorry.
What were you saying?
I would like it on the agenda for the next meeting.
I agree.
Moral, immoral?
What?
Is that Mr. Moral, immoral?
Can we?
Okay, they're muted.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
Distracted by little kid. That's great. Are we going to get to something that the state's talked about at various times as not requiring masks once we get to a certain
Vaccination rate.
vaccination?
Yeah, so the state has set a bar of 80%, and if a district reaches or a building reaches that threshold by October 15th, it's the district's determination whether to do that or not. Some districts are saying 80% is too low, and they want to do it at 90%. As best as I can follow this, right, and obviously I'm not a doctor, though I pretend I am, and I talk to lots of doctors constantly and nurses, or doctor of medicine, right, I'm the other kind of doctor, but I think masks are a useful tool in the toolbox. And I'm open to the discussion at 90%. I don't think it makes a lot of sense at 80%.
And I think the Board of Health probably could weigh in on it also.
But I'm curious, like that's just my thinking. Do other people have thoughts on that?
I could live with 90%.
I just feel that if we go 90% and there's going to be kids, no kid wants to be wearing a mask, but the majority of kids don't wear masks. I think doing that, it's got to be everybody's masked or everybody's not masked. I just feel, I don't know, the students can point, they're here. I mean, if you want to stand out from the crowd, you'll have a mask on.
Well, if we go with mandatory vaccination, then that's not a problem. I mean, unless you have a medical religious reason, whatever we decide is an exemption, you're gonna be vaccinated, and therefore you, if we go with 90%, we'll be at 98% probably.
Yeah.
And I've not done a ton of research on the second part of what you're asking, Bill, but from a implementation standpoint, not knowing who's wearing a mask and who isn't is really challenging, right? So that's why I much prefer that we're all wearing masks. I wonder if you reach the 90% threshold, is that so high that even people who
Aren't vaxxed
can go maskless? And between now and our next meeting, I'll do a little more research on that.
I agree with Bill, that it should be that nobody has to wear a mask
Or everybody. I agree with that.
Although, I think there'll be some people who voluntarily want to wear one.
Absolutely.
I'm one of those people who do that all the time, just because I'm so used to it, and that's fine.
That's fine, anybody can wear it.
Yeah.
In this new policy, can fully vaccinated students opt into it? Or would it be a drain on our resources and it's going to sort of slow the cogs of the wheel?
No. I was doing it to be nice and accommodating. And there's some other instances, and I can't remember if, like, a condition of us participating in crew at Lennox is that we have to submit weekly pool testing results, right? I don't think there are any other co-op sports right now, but we may. And we're not there yet, but we host the co-op in swimming. Mount Everett does it in hockey. They may continue. So from a resource use perspective, if people want to do pool testing, I'm all for it. I'm willing to not compel everybody to do it if they've gone the extra step to be vaccinated.
Corey, go ahead.
I guess I was just curious, given that testing, like you talk about, Peter, with masks being one of those tools in the toolkits to stop the spread, testing, from what I've read, is one of those as well. Do you have any sense of why DESE is kind of discouraging or kind of changing their view on the testing piece?
I don't know that they changed their view. I think they've been saying it all along, and the more I dug into it, the more that became obvious to me. I think there are probably three overarching reasons, and it's not just vaccinated people. They also don't want people who have been positive in the last 90 days to test, because the likelihood of a false positive is very high, right? I imagine at the state or national level, testing vaccinated people is seen as like a braces and suspenders moment. It's duplicative and not perceived as a great use of resources. For us, the resource isn't the cost of doing it, because the state's covering the cost. The resource is time, pulling kids out of classes, and staff time processing all of it. Now, we have an extra nurse, and she's great and helps with that, but doing the number of tests that I shared earlier in a 2.5-hour window in a school is challenging.
Do I have a motion?
Motion to endorse the proposal by Superintendent Dillon.
Do I have a second?
Second.
So I have a motion by Rich, a second by Molly. Further discussion? Hearing no further discussion. Roster.
So will kids automatically need to show up? Well, how do they get out now that they're all signed in?
The importance, and I should have said this at the beginning, so the consent to do it doesn't mean you have to do it. It means you can do it. And we want the consents, because on any given day, if Sally is running a fever, we want to be able to rapid test her, right? what we're going to have to do with the secretaries and the principals and the nurses, and we're doing this already, is we have a big list of high school students who participate in extracurricular activities, and their participation is contingent upon them doing the testing. We also have a big list of everybody who's vaccinated, right? So we'll just run the lists off each other, and the vaccinated folks will be waived from the testing, and the unvaccinated folks will continue to do the testing. And if any of the vaccinated folks want to do the testing, then they can continue to do the testing.
And where's the list of vaccinated? Is that from the state?
We spent like 2 weeks pulling that data from the state database. So we have it as a very, very secure file. I think only 4 people in the district have access to it, me and or maybe 5, me and the 4 nurses. We have that. Every once in a while, we're going to have to update it. A flaw of the state system is you can only check 1 person at a time, which is like insane, right? And you could do that in a 1,200 student district sort of barely. Imagine if we had 12,000 or 120,000 or something.
So we have a motion, we have a second. I think it's clear though, if we vote in favor of this, it's not starting tomorrow. It's going to take you time to implement this, correct?
It'll take us time to implement it. I think by the pool testing next week, we should be in pretty good shape. I mean, the students will self-identify that they are vaccinated, and I'll message us in some way, so it makes it easier.
So we do have a motion, a second. It's a roll call vote. Ann?
Aye.
Jason? Aye. Sean? Where's Sean?
We might have lost Sean.
Yeah, I don't see that. Bonnie?
Aye.
Holly?
Aye.
Bill?
Yes.
Diane?
Yes.
Corey?
No.
Rich?
Yes.
And yes, so it's 8-1 in favor.
Okay. Thank you. So.
And if we're gonna do the vaccine mandate on the agenda.
We will talk about it in
Yeah.
the meeting. I'm not guaranteeing we're voting on it then, but at least we'll be on.
No, but it's not on the agenda for people who have an opinion about it, no.
Yes.
And one other thing that I'll say again is, if things change, I'll come back to you. Right. So like the only thing we learned in the last 18 months is that everything is constantly in flux. If this changes, I'll come back to you. So what I'm going to do now is open Iona's presentation and just give me a sec to do that and share it, and then we'll go on to health and wellness. Just while I'm getting ready to do that, any other questions about COVID-19? Okay. Keep doing what you're doing, students, parents, families, and staff. It seems to be working, which is great. Great. And then Iona, just tell me when you want me to.
Yeah, so I'm ready. You're ready?
Yeah, and I just want to change this. Okay.
Right. So I'm just here to do a little bit of an update of, I was hired in the spring, so started in mid-May, and I'm so glad I was actually able to start the position before the school year ended last year. It gave me a significant amount of time at the end of the school year to, as Peter just said, do basically a listening tour. So within the context of all 3 of the school buildings, I interviewed over 50 people and did focus groups. In the spring, I was really only able to do focus groups at the high school. I'm in the process right now of setting up some focus groups in the middle school to try to help to continue to have the student voice guiding different program topics that are happening. And I'm excited to be here because the last time I was here in front of this group of people was pre-COVID, when Sarah Rossin and the wellness committee that came to present, that I was on that committee and a mentor to Sarah, to report that we still have a long ways to go, but we have come a very long way since then, particularly in curriculum at the high school. So it's great to be able to see that. And so I wanted to start just with a definition, and this one actually comes from the Massachusetts Interscholastic Athletic Association. And the reason that I like this about wellness is that it describes it as an active process. And wellness right now, there's such a need. I mean, we knew as we were here in front of you a couple of years ago, pre-pandemic, that there was a need to have a focus on wellness. And obviously the past 18 plus months has really highlighted the need even more so. And again, it is a process and it's moving towards both a healthy and a fulfilling life. So also it's a big umbrella in my mind. So I wanted to highlight today just mental health in general, because I think that's the sort of the immediate thing that needs to be addressed, and it's being addressed very well within the district with some new initiatives. So from my interviews, the couple of things that came up, these are all quotes from the spring. SEL, being social emotional learning, is critical. Everyone is now starting to see it. So the pandemic, one of the positives that has come from a really negative situation is that people are really starting to see the correlations between mental health and well-being, and knowing its impact in learning, in being able to live up to your full potential, being able to not get drawn into unhealthy coping mechanisms such as substance use. And there's just a recognition that there's a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety, and that there's a real need that we need to normalize mental health as part of how we educate, not only in the schools, but in the community. And again, a few more quotes, and these, I like to do this juxtaposition of that top one coming from last spring, where educators, and this is one of many who are saying it was the hardest stretch of time in their different tenure, lengths of tenure as educators. And that continues to today, because when the administrators are getting together, even just this week, acknowledging how all the ways in which the stresses of the pandemic have showed up is making it harder for the educators to navigate and manage and support that. Student mental health. Students are also very aware not only of their own levels of stress and anxiety, but that they are in a position where their peers are asking them for support and they're not really sure how to navigate that. And that it's a hard transition to go from whatever level of remote only and hybrid to being back fully in, and many people talking about even just the basic social anxiety around that. So I just wanted to highlight some of the things that the district is doing and doing quite well. So I just wanted to say that we do have this issue and we need to be looking at it in terms of curriculum. But these different initiatives that are happening right now, I think, are what for me is going to be foundational for anything else to be really successful. So the ruler curriculum is the social emotional learning curriculum that we started training on this summer. There was a cohort from each of the schools that five included a five-person team from each of the buildings that included an administrator, clinician, and teachers. And there was a training over the summer, and then the focus this school year is for those teams to be the ones who are going to be educating the other educators in the building. So bringing this into the context of faculty meetings and getting fluency of these social emotional tools within the teachers and the adults in the building, so that then they can turn around and be embedding that into their classrooms with the students the following year. It's one of the things I really like about that Yale model is that it does not just hand something to teachers and expect that they can just deliver it. They're getting the training as well. Another really exciting thing is the Panorama, which is an SEL surveying and online data platform that's going to be really, really useful in helping us know what our needs are. Castle, there's been training in that, so again, a lot of focus on social emotional learning, and of course the Stoke collective work that reported last week, that being foundational to so many in our community, adding to their ability to have mental well-being within our school community and safe. And these are the little tools. I thought these are the ones that are in my office across the way. The bottom one there is the mood meter that from Yale that everyone's getting acquainted with. The others are the Castle frameworks. And so these are things that you will see all throughout all three buildings, hanging in people's offices and the ways that meetings are being run. So I just wanted to have a little bit.
And maybe in the future, we'll do a little deep dive on the mood meter with this group.
That'd be great. That'd be fun. Yeah. We do our own charter here. Ooh.
Yes. Okay, are you good for the next one? Okay.
Yeah. And then just to give a little in depth of this mood meter, for me, it's a really great one because so many of the ways to look at this, the foundation of social emotional really just looks at the feelings as opposed to the feeling and the energy level. And so I think it's a really great combination. This is just an example of how to use a mood meter. Just that'd be fun to just put that out there for you all to just see. And then lastly, I think this is also an ask on my part. One of the things I've been doing this past month is really trying to create systems and structures for core wellness. So groupings of people that can really move things forward. And the top layer of that is this right here, which is the District Wellness Committee. And this is the one that includes community partners, parents, representatives from all three buildings as far as adults and students. And this, we had our very first meeting Tuesday. We're in planning. It's going to be a monthly meeting. We're in planning of figuring out a better timing. So I will make sure that gets reported out. But we are looking for representatives from the community, if you all know of anyone that might be interested in joining. And then beyond that, we have a district mental health group that includes all three buildings. And then each of the buildings now is starting to have focused groups that either are clinician-based and work these specifically that way. But the other thing I'm really interested in, the high school's already started with a wellness club. They're going to be bringing in becoming a national chapter for mental health active mind. And we're working on getting student voice in both the middle school and the elementary school as well.
So any questions for Iona? I'm really excited about this work she's doing.
Exciting. It's good.
That's great.
Yeah, looking forward to the future for sure.
Other things we'll obviously come back to the group on is the prevention needs assessment survey data. That's that longitudinal study that we do in 8th, 10th, and 12th grade every 2 years. We have some data there that's worth sharing as well.
A couple hands up. Corey, go ahead.
Yeah, I had two questions. First one being just in light of the fact that teachers, administrators, et cetera, are so stressed and overwhelmed. And while all of this sounds incredible, what kind of measures and how are we rolling this stuff out to make sure we're not overwhelming the population with more initiatives and more things to learn and more frameworks to roll out and things like that. And the second question is just how do we plan or do we plan on educating the parent population, kind of the next level down from this type of a presentation, but really doing like, calls or nights when parents can come in and learn more and do deep dives into each of these initiatives.
Yeah. So one of the other things I really like about the Yale programming is that it really has a playbook about, so this first year when I was saying that the focus is on the educators, it's also about giving opportunities for the social well-being of the educators through that work. So hopefully in some ways that it's also healing. And then as far as the parent population, there is part of that whole footprint is how to move it out into the community and the families. So it includes the educators, the students, and the families in the model as it rolls out over time. And I am also very interested in the committee that I was just speaking about, that larger district wellness committee. One of the missions of that, or goals of that committee, will be to be helping to plan and organize family and community and school wellness-based events and education programs.
Can I add something to it? I don't know. So let me just give a really concrete example. So there are 13 or so people in this office. And once a week, we meet with Iona for 15, maybe 20 minutes, just to work on this, right? And we're doing a little breathing and some mindfulness stuff and some other things. And at maybe the first couple of weeks we did it, people were a little anxious and antsy, like, I'm so busy. How can I take 15 minutes to get my head together? And now we're in the third or fourth week of it, and we still all sort of joke about that, but taking 10 minutes or 15 minutes out of your week to focus on yourself in a world where we all focus on everything else is I think really transformative. And anecdotally, folks are saying, like, I was reluctant to do this and my day went much better, or I woke up on the wrong side of the bed and I don't feel that way anymore. I came to work a little low energy and now I'm high energy. So I'm hoping that there's a sort of general concern that people have initiative fatigue, but I'm hoping of all the initiatives, this is actually one that is healing and giving back to people. And the same way, like, it's hard to wake up at 6 in the morning or 5:30 and go for a run, but after that run, you feel great. I'm hoping people have that experience.
Another hand up, Annie Alquist.
Hi there. Hi, Iona. I'm really excited to hear about your everything that you learned. My question is specific to our students and families of color and other marginalized and minoritized groups. Iona, how do you plan to link the wellness work to the work of the Stoke Collective and other groups who are specifically aiming to focus their support around our students and families of color? Because as we all know, they face particular challenges to wellness. So I'm eager to hear your response. Thank you.
Yeah. So I am already starting to build relationship with those at the Stoke Collective, also with America, who's just been hired to be an advocate for those families. And I definitely have in mind how to, even just general wellness. I've been meeting with all the nurses right now, trying to help America figure out what some of the needs are, and even getting people signed up for the pool testing. So for the new immigrants who have just been coming into school after school had already started. So I'm looking forward to building relationships through the Stoke Collective, through working with America, and trying to figure out how to best serve that population.
Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you very much.
Great. Yeah, so thank you, Iona. So what I'd like to do now is shift to our next agenda topic, which is the 9th grade team update. And Christy will maybe trade seats with Iona to be closer to the camera and tell us about what's going on with the 9th grade team. Today, Christy's giving the overview. In the future, some subset of teachers will come and also participate in it. And when we got your support to move forward with this 9th grade initiative, one of the things we committed to were regular updates. So we're a few weeks into school. This seems like a good time for an update. In the future, we'll be at the end of a marking period, and that'll be a time, or a little after the end of a marking period will be a time for some additional updates. So Christy, take it away.
Okay. Can everybody hear me? Okay, so I'm here to update you on the work of our 9th grade team. Our work is well underway, and I want to remind everyone of our goal, that we're working towards equitable outcomes and quality educational experience for each and every student at Monument Mountain. There was this summer substantial professional learning, and there continues to be professional learning that this team is engaged in. This summer, the two main things that the team was focused on was professional development and proficiencies. They worked collectively beginning in June all the way through the summer on developing units and assessments that are aligned to proficiencies. This is a work in progress and continues to evolve as the year unfolds. In the summer, they also met regularly as a team to align their expectations and develop a shared vision around this work, and I'll be sharing some of that as we go through this presentation. Currently, in school, the team meets once a week. They have a common prep period where they meet on Thursday mornings, and they work to continue their alignment. They are planning for how they're going to address gaps and sharing ownership of students. Not quite in the same way as last year. Last year, students were really potted so that they shared the same teachers, and there's not quite that same level of shared ownership, but since they're all teaching all of the 9th graders, they are able to talk about how this is going across the 4 core content areas: ELA, math, social studies, and science. So there are 3 important examples of the work that I want to share tonight with you. The first is an example of the shared proficiency. The 9th grade team chose to focus the first quarter on communication as the shared proficiency. They are also developing work within their content areas using other proficiencies, but this is just one example that they are all using across all 4 content areas. So they developed the cross-content proficiency of communication. I'm sorry, it's kind of small. With 3 standards or indicators connected to communication, and decided to use this shared rubric and shared language. A not yet literally means a student has not engaged in the work at all yet. So it's not accessible for a teacher to assess. If a student is emerging in an area, that's the lowest level of feedback a student would receive in a particular proficiency, in this case communication. Developing is the next level up, and then proficient and extending. We've actually changed extending to advanced, and that's connected to a challenge we encountered in reporting in PowerSchool. So like I said, this actually is evolving on the ground as we work.
Too many E's in it. This is like the E's.
Because we couldn't have the abbreviations both have the E's, and we were afraid it would be more confusing than it might already be for folks who are trying to figure out what we're doing. But for parents of 9th graders who are looking at PowerSchool, you will see now reporting out grades that are not actually numbers, right? Teachers are entering emerging, developing, proficient, or advanced based on their performance of the student in these standards that they're assessing aligned to proficiency. It's difficult, and people I know have a little bit of frustration about communication because of this transition. So that's what these mean, and the teachers can share other rubrics with you that they're developing in, again, content-specific areas. So in math, the math teachers are collaborating on rubrics, science, same thing. So this work is ongoing across the board.
That's a power score. At the end of the quarter, they're going to get a regular grade, right?
They are, right? We haven't transitioned our entire grading system to proficiencies.
Yeah.
And all of this is gonna have to transfer into a percentage at the end. So, and that's part of what they're trying to work through.
Sure.
Like if we're using proficiencies for assessment, and then at the same time, at the end of the quarter, we need to have number grade, we want some alignment across the board so that one teacher doesn't change something to, 82 and another teacher interprets that as a 91, because that would not make any sense.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes, that students don't know what the numerical grade that'll draw on their transcript is gonna be until the end of the quarter. And it could fall, range. I know that some teachers have this advanced or extending as a range from anywhere between 85 and 100 points.
Or I think 95
I
on the rubric.
I don't want to speak on behalf of any individual teacher, so I think that you could ask the individual teachers that. I can bring questions back to them. I do know that they have been communicating a range, and even on the example that I just shared, it gave like a sense of where an extending would fall is about in the 95 range, for example. Proficient about 85, developing 75, emergent 65, so the ballpark, right? And then we're not just talking about one assignment over the course of a quarter, so it's multiple assignments that students would get where they're, getting grades like you would if you were actually getting those numeric grades. And then how does that translate? Thanks. All right, next one. Separation on feedback on habits of work is another big area that the team spent a lot of time on. And this is the idea of giving students explicit feedback for how they're working and not the achievement in the content itself, so that the students get feedback separately on these two things. And I'm trying to do a lot of it, so bear with me. Again, we have the emerging, developing, proficient, again, excelling. The habits of work that the 9th grade team has zeroed in on are attendance and punctuality, preparation and completion, collaboration and participation, and self-direction and perseverance, and some general descriptors for each of those levels. The team debated this summer a lot about if there should be numeric information in here about like what does it mean to be rarely on time versus frequently on time versus consistently on time. They chose to keep the language more general, and that allows them to have the conversations with the students. Remember, the goal of this is to give the students themselves feedback and have the students also self-assess. I know some of the educators are focusing on like one of these per week and having conversations with students about like this week, let's talk about collaboration and participation in class next week. And that's not how every single teacher is doing it, so, but they are all using this shared rubric. And the final one I want to share is defining the meaning of honors distinction. This is the document from August. This is still evolving. They did agree that for a student to earn honors distinction, and please remember honors distinction is an award the student receives at the end of the year. So it's not at the end of the quarter that they're going to receive honors distinction, it is at the end of the year. Habits of work for students, they felt pretty strongly that students should be proficient or excelling in their habits of work to earn honors distinction, and then that there are content-specific criteria. And these are the initial descriptors in the 4 core subject areas of what it would mean to earn honors distinction. And there's a little bit of difference in terms of what is an honors challenge in social studies versus math. So for specific questions, we'll be answering some of those when we have our open house that we're hosting on October 20th. for ninth grade families.
Christy, could you also just tell people about the thing we were talking about today, which is the indicate, I forget exactly what the language was, but that somebody's on track?
Yes.
Yeah.
So because the honors distinction won't report on the transcript until the end of the year, we felt it was important to give students and families feedback on that over the course of the year. And the solution that we came up with is to do a comment on the report card that will say a student is on track to earn honors distinction. So the grade will report out at the end of first quarter, and the comment will be there if the student is on track, or not be there if they're not. Not getting it first quarter does not exclude them from earning honors distinction for the year, but it does give the student and family information about how they performed in the first quarter. And our goal, and the whole point of this is around growth mindset, is that students who want to can improve over the course of the year and still earn their honors distinction. The solution for the honors distinction that we came up with in PowerSchool is it's actually a grading preference that we have to change. And what will happen is on the transcript, the grade will report out, and then next to it will print the word honors if the student has earned honors distinction. And then the weighting for that grade will get changed for a weighted GPA. But the grade itself will not change. So if a student earns a 87, it's an 87 whether they earn the honors distinction or not. The honors distinction will appear as a word, and the weighting would calculate differently in the weighted GPA.
As we make our way through this experiment, I guess it would be 3 years down the road, how will that affect seniors who, for their first 2 quarter grades, which are
That is an
obviously
excellent question that has
usually
come up.
Okay, as you're working on it, you got 3 years to figure it out.
What we are thinking we will have to do is award an honors distinction at the end of the first semester if the student was on track for the first 2 quarters. Again, I'm just projecting what is one possible solution.
And we
If
might,
it's something we'll have to talk about.
yeah, we might even have to do it for the first marking period for people who are applying early decision.
Right.
Or early action, or whatever, anyone
So
else.
it's a great question. It's one that we have to have a discussion.
You got time, so that's good.
But many schools that kids are going to apply to are now buying into this. And as I understood from my talks with Sean Flynn, many of them are on board with this and understand that process, and more are moving toward it because of the move away from what we're going to talk about later to more what we're talking about now.
That shall go unnamed.
So I would also say that part of our work this year, and we haven't gotten to it yet, we're only, where are we, 6 weeks in at this point?
Yeah.
But our plan this year is to convene a team of representatives from colleges to actually have a conversation with them about working with schools who are using proficiency-based transcripts to get a sense of what is best practice, what things have other schools done that maybe didn't work that we want to absolutely avoid, so that by the time we get 3 more years into this, we have a solid understanding of how we want our transcripts and report cards to be looking, so that our students can still apply to the best colleges and be competitive. Right? Ultimately, that's what we want.
Great. Any other questions for Christy?
Just a couple more slides. I want to share this one. The 9th grade team really wanted me to share that this is hard work. Please remember it is evolving. It's going to continue to evolve over the course of this year and beyond. It has been very impactful to the teachers doing the work, and we believe that this is going to be impactful for the students. One teacher stated, "I'm now much more intentional about my practice. My instruction and assessment are much more aligned." And another said, "This work just gets at the heart of what the students are learning, not just what they're doing." So next steps, we're going to continue to work through challenges as they arise. There will be challenges, and we just have to work through them. We want to continue to open the lines of communication between parents and teachers. As I mentioned, we are going to do a 9th grade open house, and teachers are having a lot of conversations about how to better communicate with parents. They know it's been a frustration with our issues with PowerSchool, and so we want to work to improve that. We are talking about how to assess our progress toward our goals throughout the year. and then obviously reporting that out to you, and keeping it in the context of this year in particular. We're working hard to return to normalcy. We need to remember that between trauma and normalcy is the middle step of healing. So we're in the middle of that too. Thank you.
Thank you. Christy, when you have a chance, can you unpresent?
Oh, yes. That's a good idea.
Cool.
Stop share.
Okay. So thanks. I think that's really valuable, and this is very, very exciting work, and it can't be said enough. To do this kind of like gigantic school reform at the hopefully tail end of a pandemic is really quite remarkable, and it made some space for us to do some work, and it's also a challenging time. So what we're going to go into now is the Mcas data, and in a little bit I'll show some slides for the sort of general public. I sent the school committee a memo about this, and it's in the packet, and I can go through that. But before I get into some of the details, I want to share a couple things. This past school year was a really hard school year. Even in the best of times, many people on this committee and the community question the validity and reliability of the Mcas assessments, right? And it's certainly not been the best of times. In a normal year, kids have 180 days in person. This past year, most students had significantly less than that. The elementary school kids had a little more time in person because class sizes were smaller, and we were able to get them in. The middle and high school kids lived through a hybrid year, right? So we'll go into this data. What's going to happen is I'm going to share a sort of high-level thing. Then both Katie and Christy are going to talk a little bit about theirs. We're not talking about Du Bois, the middle school test scores tonight, except in like quick passing, because Ben's on a college or series of college visits with his daughter, who's a senior. And rather than having me do it or Miles do it, I thought it'd be more important to do it with Ben when Ben's back here. So we'll talk about the middle school at our meeting in 2 weeks. What's in the packet, and I can show some of these slides so people have context on it. There's testing from 2019, which is the last year that was tested, and then testing from 2001. And there's that data, and we can look at that. Then there's data tied to growth. And the growth data is really interesting, but it's a little hard to understand. The type of growth you would want a student to have in a year is in the 40 to 60 range. And if it's below 40 in a typical year, that would be cause for concern. And if it's above 60, you could do cartwheels, but it also probably means the year before something terrible happened, because you don't see growth above 60 in a typical year, right? Like somebody does terribly on a test and then they do really well the next year, and then their growth score is like 80. But the sweet spot for growth is in 40 to 60. The other report, and I'll click through all these in a sec, that I shared is the county-wide report. And if you're a real data nerd, look, there's more than enough to dig into. And you'll see which districts did better or which students in which districts did better in which grades. And at the top of the page, there are two numbers that are really interesting: what each district spends per student, and the economically disadvantaged percentage. And this is really not surprising to anybody, but the wealthiest community does the best, and the second wealthiest community does the second best, and the third wealthiest community does the third best, and so on and so forth. There are places where where a particular class or school or community outperforms what they would be predicted to do or underperforms what they'd be predicted to do. And that's something that's worth looking at. The two other communities that are similar to us in some ways are Lennox and Mount Greylock, right? And those are communities we compare ourselves to quite a bit. And in some places, they outperform us, but there's a whole nother sort of level of, if we go down a level deeper, and it's not reflected in this, what are the various achievement gaps between communities, right? So if Berkshire County, and it is predominantly white, what are the achievement gaps between white students and subgroups of students of color, largely Black or African American or Latino? The other subgroup that's always worth looking at are boys and girls. 20 years ago, we would have had a big conversation about boys outperforming girls, maybe 30 years ago. Now it's clear that girls are winning the day academically and outperforming boys, right? So that's an achievement gap we need to address and look at. And then I think that for our communities, the third one is around special education and students with IEPs and how big that gap is, right? So over time, we'll talk about this. Today or tonight, I'll go in a little bit to the MCAS, and then Katie and Christy will. Next week, Ben will do that. Also on next week's agenda is to look at the expanded annual report with some of the other measures. So we'll look at that. And part of what the principals will talk to tonight is, so we've got this data set, what do we need to do going forward? And then the follow-up to that will be, what do we need to do going forward in the context of their school improvement plans? And then this all comes full circle. And as we hear from the principals in the finance subcommittee meeting, what will be discussed is what investments do we need to make to address some of what came up in this data set and some of what we did in the district and school improvement plan. Okay, so I said a lot. The other thing, and we can have the age-old debate, and lots of people are really even angrier about this than even before, is this the right assessment to use at all? Is it the right assessment to use in a pandemic? So that's a state conversation. That's a national conversation. What's going on with college admissions is really fascinating because they backed off a lot of what had been sort of foundational data, right? AP scores and standardized tests, and a lot of that in very prestigious places is optional now. And what matters more are grades, but then something to give the grades validity so they can compare one high school to another. Okay. So I'll pause for a second and then I'll pull up a couple slides. Any questions so far or things people are wondering about? Okay, so let me share this. Hang on. I don't want to share all of that. So the first one, and I'll just do a couple of these as an example. The one I'm sharing here is the 10th grade English language arts. Like the 4 categories that Christy was using before, there's exceeding, meeting, partially meeting, and not met. And what you see in this chart, and I won't go into all the details, but 2019, 2021 for each of those 4 categories, right? So what's interesting about this, and this is remarkable and anomalous, and part of why I chose it, you see a significantly larger number of students from 2019 to 21 were exceeding, and a slightly smaller number were meeting. Many fewer were partially meeting, and even fewer were not meeting, right? So this is the kind of chart that superintendents dream of and principals. It's really neat, and I'll let Christy go into it in some detail. And then another thing, and I said I wasn't going to talk about the middle school, an important thing, right? So we're psyched about the high school stuff that's going on at the high school. From a political perspective, where do you think the hardest exams are? Sort of elementary, middle, or high? Just because I wonder if people have a sense of that.
The middle school.
Yeah, it is. So it is the middle school, right? The tests in the middle school are the hardest. Anybody have a sense of why they're the hardest in the middle school? Or potentially why they might be the hardest in the middle school? If the tests were too hard in the high school, what would happen? Yeah, people wouldn't graduate and the whole society would collapse upon itself. So we're really proud of what's happening at the high school, and it's important to know that the middle school tests are particularly challenging. So as you go down, and I'll just pick this next one, 8th grade English language arts, you see there was sort of a nice trajectory in exceeding 17, 18, 19, it was going up, and then 21, it dropped. As you go across, it dropped a little bit, but it's largely flat. In the partially meeting, it went up a decent amount, right? And not in a good way, a decent amount. And then the 21 in not meeting is almost approaching where it was in 17, right? So just another one to look at. And we could go in sort of fine detail on all of these. I want to show you 2 more things. So I'll show you an elementary school one. And I guess let's stick with English. So 4th grade English at the elementary school. A slight decrease from 19 to 21 in exceeding, a slight increase in meeting, a slight increase in not meeting, in partially meeting, and then the not meeting has been really flat at the elementary school. So that's a good thing. What gets interesting is well, I'm sorry, it's on my next slide. So let me stop sharing this and share a new one. So this is a different way of looking at the data, and we're this column here. So this is what we're spending per kid and the economic disadvantage right here. And then as you go down, first you see the state, and then to the right are all the other schools or districts in Berkshire County. So third grade ELA is very close to the state number. Third grade math is above the state number. Fourth grade ELA is above the state number, and fourth grade math is quite significantly above the state number, right? So you go down this. That's one page of it. Interesting. And again, I'll sort of pause on the middle school. The high school ELA, so 75% are in those first two columns, and the state in ELA, it's 64%. So that's quite significant. The second page of this, sorry, it's just hard to move this around a little bit. Are the growth, this is the growth scores. All right, so what's interesting here is third graders can't demonstrate growth because they're not tested in second grade. And this year's fourth graders couldn't demonstrate growth because they weren't tested in 2020 when they were in third grade. But then you see the growth scores all the way down. So in fifth grade ELA, our growth scores are 7 points above the state. In math, they're a little under, on and on and on. In 10th grade ELA, it's 14 points above the state. And in 10th grade math, it's 13 points above the state. There's also this aggregate thing where third to eighth grade growth scores are calculated, and it's 34, which is within spitting distance of the state for ELA. But third to eighth grade math is 23.8, which is quite significantly below the state, right? And as we hear a little bit from the principals, we'll see some of that and where that's driven. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing this. I threw a lot of data at you. Questions about this on the high level, and then I'll have the principals talk in some more detail.
Why aren't we doing what Mount Greylock is doing in middle school math? They smoke everybody.
Yeah. No,
Like everybody across the board.
Clear as day.
Yeah.
Right. So I mean, I think there are a couple things there, right? They're a less diverse and economically diverse group. We've talked for quite
They
some
smoke Lennox, and it's no different than them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. We've talked, and this will be sort of what our action steps around this. We've talked about curriculum and where we're going with math curriculum and what that's going to look like. And while there are no silver bullets in education, having a consistent K-12 curriculum, even if it's not the perfect curriculum, makes a huge difference, right? So I forgot, Christy, do you remember what Greylock's math curriculum is? I don't remember off the top of my head, right? But a lot of the research says you don't have to pick the best one, you just have to pick one and stick to it, right? So I think the place where we can show the most growth is in math and shifting our math curriculum and having it be coherent pre-K to 12. We're like halfway down that path with our work with the teacher development group and the training we're doing. But the next step is shifting there, right? And then Bill would tell you, like, this isn't the only measure, it's not the only thing that matters, and that's all true, but it's better to be second than third or whatever in that one paradigm, right? So we've known this for a while. The shift to a better, more aligned curriculum, I think, will help quite a bit. Anybody else? Okay, so Katie, thanks for speaking about this. this is the one pass you ever get on this, because you inherited this and had almost nothing to do with
That's
it.
true.
Right.
Not bad for the place. Okay, so before I go into what we're planning to move forward with, there's a couple of disclaimers about Mcas Data, because I do have experience with Mcas Data. Typically, student growth means the most to me out of everything. Unfortunately, we don't have that this year. But I will say that the analysis we've done with the teachers thus far has been almost a relief for them, because they feared a much more larger scale drop than actually occurred, in that if you can see actually on each item, we are following the state pattern, but slightly above the state pattern. So they felt that at least what they were able to cobble together last year for some of the kids was effective. So that for them was a little bit relieving and a little bit motivating. Not that they were going to sit back, but they were happy that there wasn't such a drop. So as I mentioned, it's the more appropriate use of this is growth, but also curricularly. I tend to like to look at where the gaps in the curriculum are, rather than really individual scores for kids. So we have looked at some of the trends. Over the years, it hasn't been that different, honestly, than other gaps we've seen. Fractions are killers. Measurement and data analysis are killers usually for elementary math students. And written expression and comprehension in ELA are usually the bugaboos for all the years that I've been looking at data, whether it be Pittsburgh or here. The other disclaimer is that, none of this really solidly ties to pre-K through second grade work in an elementary school. So we do have a lot of other data that we tend to put more stock into, like the advanced kindergarten screening, benchmark assessment for reading levels, spelling inventories. They now have the Foundation Phonics program that has weekly tests and yearly entry-level testing, as well as STAR data. So I have been impressed coming into the district, seeing what the multiple measures teachers are using to make their decisions about their groupings and their interventions. So we're on the right track in that way. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't say that underlying a lot of this is just the physical and mental wellness of kids. And I think that's more apparent now than ever. So in moving forward, Tim left some legacies that we're going to continue. So we're going to maintain the established smaller class sizes that we used through COVID for as long as we possibly can. It's resulted in teachers being able to really pinpoint what kids need. We are this year restoring the use of intervention staff. And we're prioritizing for math and ELA K through 2 right now. We're prioritizing their time mostly there. And because there's statistically the greatest need there right now, if you look at all those different measures. We are continuing to secure a math program for Muddy Brook. There's been some gaps for some of the teachers in the teachers development group. We had a group that had a lot of training in the TDG, and we had a group that had no training in the TDG. So we're through the fall, we're catching up everyone to about the same point with the TDG training, which is the math habits of mind and the routines. We're addressing programmatic gaps in the ELA. We want to work towards a well-rounded research-based reading plan. It's based in the 5 components of reading instruction. We've got strong in some of the components, but we're missing some of the other components.
The meeting of the diverse needs in ELA is being addressed through enhanced tier 1 and tier 2 instruction within the regular classroom. And I would say this is especially focused in grades 3 and 4. In the 3rd grade level, we happen to have some gen ed and special ed certified folks. So they're committing to what Tim had already started, some co-teaching, so that there's a lot more work there with both special ed and ed or gen ed students, sharing students for specific skill-based interventions, and also providing double doses of things like foundation phonics for those kiddos who have been identified. We do have more 3rd graders needing phonics, continuing to need phonics intervention than is typical. But that's to be expected, I think, after the year that we had. We're also working on the enhancement of tier 1 and tier 2 instruction for English language learners, because we've had an increase. So the theory is that we can explore some of those ways to beef up tier 1 that is especially suited for ELL kiddos, that we would make more advances with them as well. Social emotional support, you heard from Iona quite a bit of what we're working on. We have the advantage of being a really solid student support team system, as well as a collaborative care model being used with regularity. So we'll be using that to its fullest. And last, I would say that our community connection periods are a really deliberate approach to appreciate the diversity that we do have and honor some of the traditions that we have had and may have been missing in the past couple years. Any questions or comments?
What's gen ed?
General education versus special education. Sorry, shortened it.
Yeah.
I only have so many words I can use in a day.
So thanks,
Thank you.
Katie. So Christy, tell us a little bit about what's going on. I think one thing that's important to know is in the elementary school, they test in 3rd and 4th grade in English and math. In the middle school, they test in all 4 grades in English and math, plus science in 5th and 8th grade. And in the high school, English, math, and science, most often all of that in 10th grade, but not universally.
So Peter stole much of my thunder.
Sorry, it was not my intention.
I did want to highlight much of what he already shared in terms of our performance in 10th grade ELA. And that was actually an improvement over our 2019, and that we outperformed the state. And our math achievement was pretty steady, and our performance was in line with the state average. As always, we are continuing to try to work to improve our student outcomes, and we are particularly keeping in mind the impact that last year had on our high school students. So the 2 big things that we're working on, there are many others, but for math in particular, we're re-engaging the teachers development group. And actually next week is when Julie will be with the middle and high school. She's going to be here all 4 days next week. And it'll be our first re-engagement with TDG and the teachers since before the pandemic. So we haven't had any student studio cycles since then, and we are going to try to get the teachers back into this work. Just a reminder that this is not a curriculum. This is about instructional practices, and it's instructional practices specifically intended for what the teacher moves need to be to create a more engaging environment in mathematics, where the students are actually involved in math discourse that enable them to deepen their own understanding about mathematics. So it's not about skill, like the drill and practice of math skills. It's about a deep understanding of mathematics and the instructional practices that promote that. At the same time, Since the pandemic, teachers have been using some online software to have students practice their math facts, right? And to do that, that repetitive practice that still is important. And the district did invest in Khan Academy this year at the district level, and teachers are making use of that platform as well, particularly with the new math class that we started for our English language learners, because students can access that in Spanish. And for some of our students, that's very helpful. So that's one thing in particular connected to math that we've done to support those new students who have joined us this year. Well, this is actually for both math and for ELA. This year is the first year that we are implementing from the beginning of the year Star 360, which is a benchmarking software. We've used it at the elementary school and middle school for several years and have not used it at the high school. The teachers have just been giving this to all of our 9th and 10th graders last week and this week. And we'll be looking at that data on our half day on October 20th to really get a sense of where teachers should be targeting instruction and particularly providing intervention for students where they are, really showing weaknesses in specific areas. So for example, I've already started looking at some of the data that's coming in, and one area that seems to be a struggle for more students than not is around reading informational texts. So having the teachers actually know that, both in English and in content areas will be helpful so that the teachers can target their instruction in a way to support students' improvement in that specific area, because we are identifying it as an area of weakness. And there was one more thing I was going to say, and it's slipped my mind, so that might be good enough for this evening.
Thank you.
So what I think we'll do, and again, we're happy to entertain questions, but let's not think of this as a one-time conversation. Let's talk about it some tonight, then let's talk about it again in 2 weeks. Then let's see how this is a thread through the district and school improvement plans, our budgeting process, and moving forward.
So can I just ask one question?
Yeah, please.
I mean, again, looking at year-to-year data with the pandemic, obviously it's beyond useless, but comparing how we did to the state or other districts, I think there's some validity in that, even though the test obviously could be improved. It is the only objective way that we can compare. And I mean, the way the high school did as far as outperforming the state is really what I look for. I didn't have any students, any of my kids in high school, so remind me again what, because it looked like it worked, what method we used for teaching. Was it the kids were only there half the time on their off days? Was it synchronous or asynchronous?
It was synchronous.
So they basically were in synchronous school 4.5 days a week.
Correct.
Half the time there, half the time not. Okay. I thought that was it, but I just wanted to thank you.
Yeah, and that was really hard on staff, but that may be the secret sauce around what happened there.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully we never have to use it again.
Right.
In case we can put it in the.
The other thing, and I had a conversation with somebody about this, Corey, about it, we have to remember that the 10th graders in 2019 or a different group of people than the 10th graders in 2021. So looking at us in relation to the state probably makes more sense than looking at classes over time, because they change, right? And there's maybe in a teacher's life every 6 years, there's that really hard class, and nobody's tried you like that before till 6 years later, and there's even a harder class. Okay, so let's move on. I wanted to share, and is Carl joining us or not? Should we just share an update on it?
We can just share an update. I don't think he is.
Okay. So this year in several sports, there was realignment out of some Berkshire County leagues to broader leagues within the Pioneer Valley. And we convened this ad hoc meeting, and we'll probably do one or two more, to both try to make sense of that and sort of what was behind the decisions, or what were behind the decisions, and then what we can do going forward to make it better. And I think and several people, Rich, Corey, Steve, Jason, were you on that call?
I was not.
Okay, Ann was. We're on the call.
I was not. I was
Okay,
away.
you weren't.
I was invited.
Yeah, no, and so many people in this room were on the call. And I think the nice thing that came out of it was for what drove the decision, but we also heard that there's some things that are tough and not working. And a couple of the things that are tough and challenging are some of our kids get to school as early as 7:30 in the morning, and if the JV and varsity are going to an away game that's an hour plus away, they may not get back till 10 o'clock at night. And that's just clearly too long a day. And it doesn't leave them time to do homework or health and wellness or even take a shower, right? It's just too long. So that's something we can work on. And we talked about scheduling or trying to schedule some of those games on Friday or Saturday nights, so it's not against a school day the next day. Maybe having multiple buses so the JV could go earlier and come back earlier, and then the varsity could go later and come back later. And then there are issues around busing. On the upside, some things that are interesting is in this reorganization, some of our teams are seeing more success than they had before. There's a new tournament structure, and as I read yesterday, several of our teams are proceeding in the tournament, so that's sort of neat. And there's not the unevenness where one school, often much bigger than us, would destroy us, or that we would destroy a school much smaller than us. So we're playing our peer schools. Christy, anything I missed that you want to add?
I do just want to add, I had an update from Carl today. He met with the District 1 athletic directors today, and we are not alone in this challenge of travel, as you can imagine. So it was a topic of conversation. We're also not alone in our challenge around busing and finding bus drivers. There's some schools have actually had to cancel games because they can't find bus drivers. The ADs agreed to look at the schedule and consider reducing the number of games over the course of the season by just a couple, because if every school reduces by a couple, that reduces the whole load on the system substantially. And the shift to more Saturdays for the further travel, everybody was in agreement on that. So I do think, we're learning as we go, and we'll make adjustments to make it better.
Yes. Was there any discussion about the winter season moving games to be immediately after school instead of later at night at AD meeting,
So I don't know if it came up at the AD meeting. We did talk about it at our meeting. One of the challenges is if one of the teams is playing, like for example, girls basketball has a game, we have boys basketball who still needs to practice, right? Or other needs for the gym space. So it's a challenge for the athletic directors to balance the need of the space for practice and the space for game time. And they are constantly doing that juggle, but it's a complicated puzzle that has to be put together. It did come up.
Also, wouldn't it be harder to schedule a game right after school? Because if we have to go to, say, for example, in Berkshire County, go to Mount Greylock, and we have a game at 3:30, that means the kid's gonna miss class. Probably they're gonna be pulled out of their 8th period class again. We get into this classic controversy that has been present since I've been at the school is pullouts and pullouts. So there's that problem. And I think that hasn't been, to me, as much of a problem with this new schedule, has it?
We still have early releases. Carl, I think, does a very good job of trying to not have too many with the same group of kids. Like I said, it's complicated. If you move it earlier, then you run into the problem on that side where students are out of class, and that's problematic. We don't want to pull our students out of their last period of class every day. We could look at starting school earlier. I mean, that's something, but then high school age.
No, and all the research says it's a terrible idea. Right? I mean, one thing that we talked about, which was sort of interesting, was the boarding school model of Wednesday early releases and Saturday games, right? So even though you thought I'd get run out of town for my half-day proposal last year, there may be a context to revisit that. But it's, I mean, I think we had a good conversation. Carl heard us. I'm glad the athletic directors are having the same conversation, and I think we can work to fine tune it. The couple other things, we've got those 2 new vans. So for our smaller teams, that may be a possibility, though we all had concerns about that. It's fine in the good weather, but I'd rather have a licensed bus driver with the 7D license to drive a group of young people in the snow than a typical coach who's not used to driving something.
Especially for the further distances.
Right. Okay.
I'll make my comment. I think the work everyone's doing to remediate it is really good. That was a great meeting, and I know these guys are working hard. But it can't go without saying that this was brought to this committee a year and a half ago. Massive concerns were raised. I went through the minutes. We heard nothing else until it was a fait accompli. And that is the type of communication that erodes trust in the district. And I know people say too much importance is put on sports. I think you can say one or the other, but it becomes representative of what the district is. It's the most visible part. Diane actually said this to me once at a basketball team, and it was, I've never forgot, is you don't get to see your kids in class. You don't get to see your kids in school. You learn about who they are when they're in the play or when they're at sports. And to have this level of communication with the school community on something that's visible was not acceptable in my mind. And I understand we were pretty much powerless in the whole thing. I don't think this is a good solution. I don't think there was a roar and cry about inequities in playing. I think there was ups and downs in it. I feel like the values that went into this decision were about the adults who run the MIAA and a small group of small-minded athletic directors, not the benefit of the kids. That's all water under the bridge. I'm never going to say this again because I know it's a fait accompli, but I couldn't not say it.
Thank you. Won't disagree with anything.
Yeah, no, I agree.
We'll commit to having more of these meetings and communicating better, both within the committee and with the public at large.
And completely, Christy and Carl doing a great job managing it and having complete confidence in them to do what's best for our kids.
Right.
What's interesting, youth sports has always had these problems. For the most part, high school has been away from the problems. Problems being that kids are not thought of when decisions are made. But now we've dragged the high school sports into it.
Yeah.
I think another thing that I think about this whole thing, Paul Gibbons sat here before this committee 4 years ago and talked about the problems that he saw in athletics. And the thing that I see was declining enrollment. And I'll never forget a meeting here in this room. The guy who was head of the Berkshire Collaborative Educational thing, the guy that runs the ski resort, when he said he had a meeting about what they were going to do in the collaborative or in the educational task force. And a guy stood up and said from Hoosick, I believe it was, or Drury, all I care about is Friday night football. That's what I want. And he looked at the guy and said, well, with the way declining enrollment is going, that's gonna be a question mark in 4 to 5 years. And I never forgot that declining enrollment is driving a lot of this because certain sports are gonna get kids to come out. And we know that there are football schools, and I remember, I take what Jason had said a couple of years ago about, there are football schools and then there's us, okay? We have good years and bad years. And I looked at what Carl had said, and you look at some of those divisions and that was set up, and all these names, that I don't know where they came up with, these leagues. And I see they tried to put football schools in together. They tried to put us in a good range where it's competitive. And as I said to Peter on the phone, because I couldn't make the meeting, we're competitive. And we're not getting our, what's handed to us week after week after week, which sets back any type of athletic program. That you have to be at least competitive. I talked to Coach Chris Vanello about some of the issues, and he said to me, "Oh, the bus rides, the kids love them. The kids love the bus rides. It's part of the game. They love it. They are playing music, everything." So there are some good points to it, but I think the issue, the real overriding driving is this is declining enrollment and trying to be competitive within our range of student body.
But our enrollment's not declining.
Pardon me?
Our enrollment's not declining.
That's true right now.
Yeah, and
Plus 8 years.
Overall.
we'll share an update on that. The October 1st is the date that's officially happens. We're up quite a number of students from last year, which is really unusual.
Well, not last year, but what about the year before? Because last year we had a lot of students leave because
Right.
of COVID. So how about the year before?
I can't speak definitively to that,
Okay.
but we're in a very nice
Yeah.
path when a lot of places are losing students. Now, the problem is the whole county's losing students, so we have our own and we're taking some others.
I don't know if we can sort of do this, but I think I would urge this committee to sort of make sure that we're that we often talk about a lot of things and not a lot of concrete steps are taken. And at the end of the day, right, it's possible that kids are on a bus right now coming home from Springfield or from Westfield and are going to be getting home really late, right? I know for a fact that the volleyball team got home at 10 o'clock last night, right? That's not acceptable by all means, right? Because I come home at 5 o'clock from these meetings and I'm still up till 11:30 doing homework, right? So how are these students doing that? So we may sort of push this off meeting to meeting, but every single day students are riding those buses and it's throwing off their social emotional health and their sleep schedules are off and they're not completing their work. So I think it's important I think it's inevitable that we are going to probably stay in the Pioneer Valley League. There's not much you can do about this. There's no perfect solution, but I think by our next meeting or maybe by the next month, we have concrete plan, concrete steps, resourcing all resources, and how we can make this a tad bit better.
Yeah, one of the things to remember before we blow this out of proportion, traveling girls basketball, for instance, boys basketball, traveling to North Evans and Williamstown, we've never got back to 10 or 10:30 for the last 40, 50 years. It hasn't changed.
Right.
The kids, what has to happen is kids on the buses to do their homework if they can, or when they get there, especially if they're at varsity and they're waiting for the JVs to play, they have to do the work. It's been that way forever. There are things that need to be changed, but there are no concrete steps we're going to take for this season. I mean, we have one vote out of how many percentage?
Right.
I mean, we could do something famous that Rich would do is pull out of something, but I don't think that's going to serve any purpose. So I think we have to work within the county and the counties and try to figure this out and slowly make small steps as we go along. There are a lot of athletic directors in schools who see sports as important as education, and that makes it difficult for us.
Corey has your hand up there, Steve.
Go ahead, Corey.
I guess I would just caution Steve, based on what you just said, that just because we've done something for years, and this being the first year maybe that people are vocalizing it, it doesn't mean that it was right in years past either. So I wouldn't want to skip over the fact that I think this has brought up some good points and is encouraging a dialogue to happen that probably was long overdue.
No, I don't disagree with any of that. It's just, I think the real push and pull here is pulling kids out of school so that they get home earlier is no better than having what been doing for 40 or 50 years. So we do have to figure something out, but right now we haven't figured that out.
Okay, should we move on?
Yes.
All right, so the next thing.
No, Erica Milky has her hand up.
Well, she's the next thing on our agenda. I was just going to introduce her.
I just wanted to add very quickly on the last item that a lot more of the homework has to be done on computers. So it's not quite the same, Steve, as when people would just like grab their worksheets and notebooks and work on it, you know, but just the way
Wi-Fi everywhere. I'm not that old.
Okay. So the next thing on our agenda is a proposal and potentially a proposed vote on Indigenous Peoples Day. I think Erica and her son are going to speak to this in some detail. There's a proposal in the packet. This is something that the town of Great Barrington did a while ago, and I'm actually quite pleased that Erica brought it up at our last meeting. So Erica, I hand it over to you, and I think we're excited to hear your proposal.
Thank you. So just as a little bit of a preface, I was just curious about why it was still showing as Columbus Day on the school calendar, and little did I know that would mean that I would be roped into a proposal and presenting it. That's what I get for asking a question. My son is actually going to start us off.
My name is Sebastian Ortiz-Milky. I'm a 7th grader at Du Bois Regional Middle School. For decades, Christopher Columbus has been celebrated as a hero who discovered America. Indigenous people have made it clear that in truth, he and his men were responsible for the enslavement, rape, and murder of countless Indigenous peoples in the Caribbean. The lands where he arrived were invaded, not discovered. Since the 1970s, Indigenous people have asked that Indigenous Peoples Day be celebrated instead of Columbus Day on the second Monday in October. This day should be a positive day to learn about and honor Indigenous history and peoples. It's way past time for our school district to join the growing number of states, towns, and schools that are making this important change. I hope that from now on, the second Monday in October will be a positive day to learn about and honor Indigenous history and peoples.
A lot of bragging went into that, ladies and gentlemen. So there is a really detailed and overly formal proposal that Jonathan Bruno and I worked on together. We wanted to make sure to do it as accountably as possible, and he submitted it to Bonnie Hartley of the Stockbridge Muncie Band of Mohicans. And I also was in contact with people from the movement Indigenous Peoples Day of Massachusetts. It's led by Indigenous members of Massachusetts who are working on initiatives accountably together. So anyone who's interested can check it out on their website, indigenouspeoplesma.org. Is it necessary to read the entire resolution?
I was hoping you would.
Okay, I will do that. A resolution relating to Indigenous Peoples Day, declaring the second Monday in October as Indigenous Peoples Day in the Berkshire Hills Regional School District, replacing and abolishing the use of Columbus Day, encouraging other institutions to recognize Indigenous Peoples Day, and reaffirming the school district's commitment to promoting well-being and growth of Massachusetts Indigenous community. Whereas Berkshire Hills Regional School District recognizes that the Indigenous peoples of the lands that would become known as the Americas have occupied these lands since time immemorial. And whereas Berkshire Hills Regional School District recognizes that Great Barrington, Stockbridge, and West Stockbridge are built upon the ancestral homelands and villages of the Indigenous peoples of this region, without whom the building of our towns would not have been possible. to wit, from the Mohican Nation Stockbridge Munsee Band, upon which much of present-day district is situated. And whereas the Berkshire Hills Regional School District wishes to uplift the Indigenous roots and history of and contributions to our district, this region, and this country. And whereas Berkshire Hills Regional School District values the many contributions made to our community through Indigenous people's knowledge, labor, technology, science, philosophy, arts, and the deep cultural contribution that has substantially shaped the character of the region. And whereas Berkshire Hills Regional School District has a responsibility to oppose the systematic racism towards Indigenous people in the United States, which perpetuates high rates of poverty and income inequality, exacerbating disproportionate health, education, and social crises. And whereas the district promotes closing the equity gap for Indigenous peoples through policies and practices that reflect the experiences of Indigenous peoples, ensure greater access and opportunity, and honor our nation's Indigenous roots, history, and contribution. And whereas Indigenous Peoples Day was first proposed in 1977 by a delegation of Native nations to the United Nations sponsored International Conference on Discrimination Against Indigenous Populations in the Americas. And whereas in 1990, representatives from 120 Indigenous nations at the First Continental Conference on 500 Years of Indian Resistance unanimously passed a resolution to transform Columbus Day into an occasion to strengthen the process of continental unity and struggle towards liberation, and thereby use the occasion to reveal a more accurate historical record. And whereas the district committee, the school committee acknowledges the second Monday of October as Indigenous Peoples Day and urges the community to join in this observance. Further, the school committee refers this change to rules to review our policies and procedures for compliance with this change. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Berkshire Hills Regional School District 1 hereby proclaims that the second Monday in October each year will be known as Indigenous Peoples Day, replacing and abolishing the use of Columbus Day, and 2, celebrates and honors the foundational contributions of Indigenous people to the history of our towns, county, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and this country, and 3, shall continue to promote racial, economic, educational, health, and social equity and justice for all people and oppose discrimination towards Indigenous peoples as it is perpetuated through inequities in income, health, and education.
Thank you, Erica.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Somebody want to make the motion, please?
Do I have to read?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, you can just say so moved.
There's a form of motion at the bottom of it.
Motion to adjust the school calendar to identify the second Monday in October as a celebration of Indigenous Peoples Day and abolish the use of Columbus Day. In addition, Berkshire Hills Regional School District will establish an Indigenous Peoples Day Committee to develop and implement the commemoration of Indigenous Peoples Day, including instruction in the schools on the culture, history, and diversity of Indigenous peoples. These steps will reaffirm the district's commitment to equity, ensuring that all people are treated with respect, dignity, and cultural understanding, and seeks to combat prejudice and eliminate discrimination by promoting awareness, understanding, and accurate truths and history of Indigenous peoples across our district and beyond.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call vote, and?
Actually,
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
So, I know it's popular now to look back at in history, actually, from my perspective. So I have absolutely no problem removing Christopher Columbus from the occasion in total. However, what does concern me is the anti-Italian liberals that cause some. Now, I'm confident that those making this resolution tonight have no such thoughts, and that their intentions were 100% pure. But that doesn't erase the fact that there are those who do feel better about such a move. Because after doing some basic research, it became apparent that when the holiday was created, it was not so much to praise Columbus, but more to recognize the many contributions that Italian Americans have given to our country, and to also recognize how, as a group, they're often persecuted and marginalized for many, many years in the U.S. And I think at the time, Columbus was chosen to represent them, but the main focus was to be for a celebration of Italian Americans and the positive impacts they made to our country despite the prejudices that had to grow. Now, I know there are some Italian Americans who feel that this phrase is unnecessary, and they feel okay just remaining today as Indigenous people today. And that's fine. But that doesn't nullify the fact that there are a lot of other Italian Americans who feel differently. And that this is just another example of a long line of prejudices levied against them. So what I'd like to propose, and what has been done in other places like New York, is that we rename today Italian Heritage Day and Indigenous Peoples Day. Now, in a perfect world, we would have two separate days to honor each individual group. Another day could be used for either one, or not what's in the card and deal there. So I would like to formally amend the motion to say a holiday falling on the second Monday in October will be named Italian Heritage Day and Indigenous Peoples Day.
Do I have a second to the amendment?
Second.
Did I hear a second?
Second.
Okay. Discussion.
I wonder if this, I mean, I realize there's an Irish Day, but that's not how kids get off from school. But, you know, I don't think we have a British holiday, and German holiday, and a French holiday, because all kinds of people have contributed to our culture, our country, our education, on and on and on. So I think it gets a little, you know, like, it doesn't quite ring true to me. I certainly don't want to denigrate any group of people by renaming this. And I grew up in a pretty Italian town. I never was aware of it being celebration of Italy or Italians. It was a celebration of somebody who came in and invaded America.
Any other discussion?
I would think, as a social studies teacher for many years in the district, that the motion says to develop and implement commemoration of Indigenous Peoples Day, including instruction in the schools. And I think it's like saying, well, you know, you can't teach the Constitution without including the founders who wrote the Constitution. Some of them who, as we now know, were slaveholders. That would be included. I think that to answer what Jason has offered is I think that could be done within instruction in the schools to include what your concerns are in this cultural history and diversity of Indigenous peoples, but also to include some of the misinterpretations of Columbus Day itself, as you have pointed out. So I think good instruction would do that. And I think this motion, it seeks to combat prejudice and eliminate discrimination by promoting awareness, understanding, and accurate truths and history of Indigenous peoples. But good teaching would include a background of how this day was named Columbus Day in the first place and why that historically has been put into question now. So I don't think really the motion is needed.
Anyone else? So we'll vote on Jason's amendment. It's a roll call vote. Ann?
No.
Jason?
Aye.
John is not here. Bonnie?
Aye.
Ollie?
No.
Bill?
No.
Diane?
Yes.
Corey?
No.
Rich?
No.
And I'm no, so it is 6-3. It fails. So now we will vote on the main motion. And it's also a roll call vote. So Ann?
Yes.
Jason?
Aye.
John? I'm sorry, John's not here. Bonnie?
Aye.
Molly?
Aye.
Bill?
Yes.
Diane?
Yes.
Corey?
Aye.
Rich?
Aye.
And I, and that is unanimous. Erica, thank you.
And Sebastian, please.
Sebastian, yeah, thanks. Appreciate it.
So we will update our calendars, but maybe not before Monday.
You're done.
Yeah, I've said more than enough.
Subcommittees report, policy is not met, buildings and grounds,
I'm not met.
superintendent's evaluation,
Not met.
technology is not met, finance.
Yep, we met yesterday and did operations and technology, both which we received really, I think speak for me, excellent presentations from both those departments, which gave us a lot to think about in terms of what's needed moving forward. I think the advancements we're making in technology and where we're at in terms of just like accountability to the budget was the best we've ever done since I've been on the committee. So that was good. Our next one we're doing, we're not starting with middle school.
And then in special education.
Yes. So we're getting the meat of the the real educational stuff. So that should be.
And that's at October 20th, right?
That's correct. But we're going back to 5 too. Yes.
District consolidation, sharing something that is not met.
Can I just share one thing?
Regulation.
I sent out an email to that survey that the Regional School District Planning Board is doing. And then I put it up on Facebook as well. That closes in 5 days. So I'll send out yet another reminder. If students and alums could participate, it'd be great. If parents, families, and community members could, that'd be great. And as well as faculty and staff. And I think I heard today that the focus group for faculty has plenty of people, but from a staff perspective, that focus group, we're a little short, so I'll reach out to staff again about that. I think the staff focus group is going to be scheduled for a couple more weeks out.
Great.
And on the topic of the survey, there's a couple of media outlets that done good coverage of it. With the exception of one minor fact is media outlets continue to cite declining enrollment as the reason for this effort. And from my perspective, I was the person who made the motion 2 years ago to do it. It wasn't the reason, and it's not factually correct. Our enrollment is not declining.
Right.
I mean, there was this 15-year-old study by the Regional Planning Commission that said that our enrollment was going to decline. And now it hasn't, and everybody is still perpetuating this narrative. And in fact, the population in our 3 towns is going up right now. So I think that's, I support the effort to examine it and hope to see if it will benefit our students. But the idea that, we have this declining enrollment crisis is false. Our district anyways.
Thank you. Peter, anything on the personnel report?
No, I mean, it's a very long personnel report, lots of project connection stuff. That's our after school 20% free grant program. And some a few other stipends. Janet Peoples, a paraprofessional at the high school, resigned, and we wish her well in her next role. So I think that's I'm just looking at it quickly. I think that's the bulk of it.
Okay. Any old and new business before the committee? Any public comment? Seeing none, unanimous consent, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.